Hey everyone, how's it going? It's your girl Reiko. We're gonna be starting book 4 today, or tonight, or whatever you happen to be listening to this. Yeah. You might notice that up there. That is the logo, and I should have been putting in these from the start, or at least ever since I got it, from my friend Akaki, who I have not seen in a long time, and I miss her. But anyway, yeah. We're gonna start book 4. You might notice I'm not using my streamer voice here. Meh, meh. I feel like there's a certain flow to these, so. Besides, my streamer voice ends up sounding so much like Nonami anyway, that when I do this, it'll just be kind of hard to tell the difference between narrator and Nonami. So to avoid that, we're just gonna, yeah. So let me just, I forgot to do this. To move my mic in front of my mouth, like I'm supposed to do for every one of these videos. Okay, let's see here. Okay, that's probably better. You can probably hear me clearer now. Alright, this is War of the Yokai, Book 4. Yeah, we're that far into this. Let me just say now, there's probably going to be at least 10 of these. So far I've written 5. And I say at least, I mean, there's going to be more than 10. I just have ideas for like 10, maybe 11. Anyway, you want the book, you don't want the plans right now. So, yeah. War of the Yokai, Book 4, Isolated Waters, by Reiko Ayanami. 7 months ago. What the hell is going on? Meet Midori Suzumiya. She is 16 years old, an undisputed star athlete on the track team at Fumizaki's public high school. Straight A student and incredibly popular among the many underclassmen who look up to her as a role model. Ahead of her were many opportunities. Colleges, both domestic and foreign, were practically knocking down her door, hoping to have her enroll, and many possible careers lay ahead of her as well. Truly, she had an incredibly bright future. Unfortunately, she will never get to see any of this, because Midori Suzumiya is about to die. Her heart was nearly pounding out of her chest. The sound of her pulse throbbed in her ears, and her lungs burned as though she'd just run 10 miles. As she looked around at the relatively unfamiliar surroundings, definitely in the warehouse district she could at least tell, Midori began to wonder if she had. All this had started about half an hour ago, when she'd bumped into a student from Tsukiyomi Academy after getting off the after-school bus. A blue-haired girl with black glasses who seemed to be Midori's own age. That girl had appeared to be rather put off that Midori had dared to touch her, but the scarlet-haired girl had simply chalked it up to be her being some rich snob or something. A moment later, and the girl had changed into something out of a nightmare. A blue demon in torn and mangled tiger print clothing. The beast swiped at Midori with razor-sharp talons, shredding a good portion of her uniform, as well as leaving a good-sized gash in her side, before the star runner did what she did best: run. By now, she'd hoped she'd outran the beast, or whatever it was, and ducked into a nearby warehouse to try and staunch the bleeding, catch her breath, as well as dial 911. They might not believe the part about it being a monster, but something was chasing her, and she needed help fast. After 2 rings, she was connected to the dispatcher. 911, what's your emergency? I'm being chased by a killer, cried Midori. Or something. They attacked me. There was about 10 seconds of silence on the other end of the line. 911, is anyone there? Her expression became confused, and more than a little frightened. Yes? Hello? she yelled louder as she began backing into a corner of the room. "My name is Midori Suzumiya, and I'm trapped in a warehouse on the south side of town. Send help!" More silence. Odd, Midori thought. No, odd. Midori thought she'd been backing into a corner, but now felt a solid wall behind her. Peering over her shoulder, she let out a brief scream as the slashing claws of the monster cleanly severed her head from her body, the sound becoming a ragged gasp as the air escaped her neck hole. As life quickly seeped away from her, and the cold embrace of death rushed to greet her, a warmth she'd never known filled her. The flames of hatred roared and snarled within Midori for the briefest of moments. Hatred for the one who'd done this, who even now wiped her blood from its hands, changing back into its human disguise. Midori couldn't have known that Emiko Ayame had been acting on the impulses of mind-altering nanobots, but she couldn't have cared less. She would have her revenge on her, somehow, someday. Present day. Ray had been sitting in the cafe she was supposed to meet her ex at for an hour now. It had been one of their favorite places to meet up back when they had started dating, and Ray had immediately suggested it when Midori had asked where they should meet. She'd watched dozens of people come and go by now, getting their drinks and settling down or heading back out to their cars to go about their days, and Ray was starting to get a little bored. Even the book she'd brought was starting to look good by now, she thought as she stifled a yawn. It wasn't that the Red Oni had been stood up, however. She had just been far too anxious and more than a bit excited for today, and had arrived an hour early. At long last, she spotted a familiar-looking and rather dinged-up silver sedan pull into the parking lot. Ray was unable to suppress a grin as an even more familiar woman stepped out of the driver's seat. Standing at 5'1", with well-tanned skin, striking teal hair, and a figure befitting her modeling career, was none other than Hitomi Nakadai, Ray's former girlfriend of 2.5 years, and best friend for even longer still. She was wearing a metallic silver one-piece dress that hugged her figure almost like a glove, though leaving enough slack so that every curve wasn't on full display, and matching gray beret on her head. It had been Ray's favorite outfit of Hitomi's, and the Oni had a feeling her wearing it wasn't an accident. Resisting the urge to jump through the window and hug her, Ray instead quickly pulled the book from her purse and pretended like she'd been reading it the whole time. "Reichi?" came that dulcet, silk-smooth voice as the gal approached a moment later. "That you? You cut your hair. Wow! Short hair looks really good on you." She looked a bit closer, spotting the book, and couldn't help chuckling. You know that's upside down, right?" Ray winced playfully and let out a small laugh of her own before standing up and opening her arms wide for a hug. "Been way too long, Hitomi," she sighed softly. "I've missed you." "Likewise," smiled Hitomi, going in for one of Ray's signature bear hugs. "Hey, before we go any further, I want to apologize for how I reacted when you, you know. It's alright," nodded Ray, closing her eyes. "But, maybe here isn't the best place to talk about that, you know? Let's open that can of beans later. Right now, I want to hear how you've been." Hitomi pulled out the chair across from Ray and sat down, leaning back and propping her legs up on the table, earning more than a few side eyes from some nearby patrons and a knowing look from Ray. Same old, she said, rocking the chair a bit. "Just got done with a photo shoot in Italy. Man, let me tell you, that place is cool. Anyway, Was meaning to ask, did you see that fire last December? Whew! I thought for sure Ayanami Industries was gonna come down. I left town right after it happened, so I never found out. Did they ever find what started it? I think it was a gas name, but I don't remember. I was also out of town when it happened, in, She had to take a second to recall her alibi. Abu Dhabi? Hitomi's green eyes narrowed as she gave Ray an appraising look. Or a prizing look. Say, you weren't involved in any of that, were you? She whispered as quietly as she could. No, do that read again. Say, you weren't involved in any of that, were you? She whispered as quietly as she could. Ray gave a single sharp nod before motioning for Hitomi to drop the subject for the moment. So, aside from the classified stuff then, what's new in Kobayashi Land? Asked Hitomi, rolling her eyes playfully. Well, I've made a few new friends, smiled Ray. 4, actually. We're co-workers too, but we hang out outside of work sometimes. They're really great people. That's awesome, Ray, grinned Hitomi as she got up. Hey, tell me more about him in a minute. I'm gonna go get us drinks. You want anything? An espresso mocha, if you don't mind. 20 pumps? 20, stuttered Hitomi, stopping dead in her tracks. Isn't that a lot much? Hold on, I have to pause the recording here. Okay, I think we're back. Not for me, winked Ray. Trust me, I need the caffeine. As she watched her go to the counter, Ray couldn't help but sigh, relaxing in her chair a bit. She'd been so worried about all of this. About seeing Hitomi again. She'd done her best to shove the partial memories of what she'd seen in the temple on Kaiju Island. In that terrible, nightmarish illusion she'd been trapped in, down to relative success. She remembered what she had seen, mostly, but thankfully none of the images remained in her head, only the recollection that she'd seen it. Still, as Hitomi came back, shaking those well-toned hips of hers with every bounced step, Ray couldn't help but shed a tear. She wasn't sure if this was a second chance, if her and Hitomi could truly reconcile and get back together. That would be up to Hitomi. Ray knew where she stood on the matter. She would always be there for her. Still, even just having her back in her life again made Ray so indescribably happy she couldn't put it into words. Over the course of the next few minutes, Ray went into as much detail as she could about everything that had happened, noting parts that couldn't be talked about at that moment until eventually Hitomi cut her off. Ray, listen, She seemed to be struggling to find the right words. Hey, it's okay. I kinda ramble, I know. No, it's not that, quickly replied Hitomi. It's just, you got a lot to talk about, and obs, we can't do it here. You wanna, I don't know, come back to my place? Talk there? Oh, sure, blushed Ray. Hitomi's place. They usually only ever went there to... Ray blushed harder, standing up and grabbing her drink. As she did, her grip on the cup nearly broke through it. You want to follow in your car, or want to ride in mine? Asked Hitomi as the two walked up to the parking lot. Oh, I didn't come in a car, chuckled Ray. I flew in. Flew? Quietly exclaimed a semi-incredulous Hitomi. You can do that? What am I saying? Of course you can. Yep, smiled Ray. My second form has big ol' wings. Maybe someday, if you want, I can take you for a night flight over the city. I think I'd like that, yeah, smiled Hitomi as they both got into her car. Just, remember how I get motion sick, alright? No loop-de-loops or anything. I make no promises, grinned Ray, playfully shoving Hitomi on the shoulder as the two left the lot. By the time they arrived at Hitomi's quaint house on the older east side of the city, the caffeine had kicked in for Rei, and she was in full storytelling mode, telling Hitomi all about how she met Nanami, and then the Emiko mission, how Usako had become a magical girl. That part alone caused Hitomi to ask several questions, most of which were answered with little more than a shrug. Rei didn't know specifics, just that stuff happened. Other questions she could at least try to answer, such as, wait, so if these, what did you call them, yokai crystals? If they're supposed to turn you into the monster that last wore 'em, why isn't this Usako kid Noni now? To which Rei replied, like, I think Nanami said it's 'cause she's got monster blood. Like a regular human would if they didn't die, yeah. But since Usako's half that one thing and half another, it sort of just, like, unlocked that power for her. A few moments later. So the Semiko, she was being controlled by what now? Nanobots? Those exist? Apparently, we've actually had to fight a few bad guys who were being controlled. But lately they've sort of vanished. Nanami's like, oddly worried about that. As Rei continued her tale, it was clear Hitomi was really getting into it. Her gaze was absolutely focused on Rei, who, despite her airheadedness, was actually a decent storyteller. When she remembered all the details, at least. Once she'd finished, catching Hitomi up to date, though leaving out the part about her nightmare on the island, she paused. Any questions? She asked. By now it was mid-afternoon, and the sun was starting to filter in through the blinds of Hitomi's living room windows. They hadn't turned the lights on, but it didn't hardly matter by now. Like a million, but Rei, I gotta ask you something. Hitomi breathed in deeply, as if steeling herself for what she was about to say. Show me the real you. Again. Please. Rei couldn't help but flinch. She remembered the last time she'd done this, and to say she was scared wouldn't be wrong. Are you sure? She asked haltingly. I know I scared you before. Yeah, and I really shouldn't have done that, sighed Hitomi. I should have trusted you, but I just... Hey, you saw a giant freaking red demon and got scared, finished Rei. Hey, it's alright. I guess for a human it would be frightening, yeah. In hindsight, maybe if I told you I was one first. Rei shook her head, banishing the what-ifs that had been prancing around in her mind for months now. Alright, this time, you're asking. Please, brace yourself, Hitomi. With an exhale, she willed her crystal to deactivate, and Rei's body shimmered and expanded, her skin changing to crimson, her hair to black, her muscles expanding as two horns popped out from her forehead. Two spikes curved out from her shoulders, and her fingers extended into large, powerful claws. When it was over, she stood there, all 8 feet and 2 inches of her. Well, this is me, stated Rei in halting tones. I mean, I have another form past this one, but this is the truest version of me. Hitomi was at a loss for words for several moments, and Rei was worried she might have been having second thoughts. But when she motioned for Rei to lean down, and proceeded to plant a kiss on the Oni's lips, her heart soared. I know I let you down before, Reichi, she said, tears flecking her green eyes. I hope you can forgive the idiot I was back then. I love you, Rei. In any form you might take. Rei wrapped her arms around Hitomi carefully, so as to not crush the girl, before leaning in and kissing her passionately. Ray wouldn't have had it any other way. 6 months ago. Where am I? Emiko had awoken slowly in a cell within Gardner HQ, back in her true form, with her arms bound behind her back. Immediately, she had panicked, not knowing at first what was going on, and with the barest of recollections of the night before. What she didn't and couldn't know at the time was that the nanobots that had controlled her weren't always active, and when they were, they suppressed much of her consciousness to the point where she was more or less in a fugue state when it happened. As such, she had no idea at first why she'd been brought here. Then the memories started flittering back, first as scattered, blurry glimpses, then as a flood of full-motion images. Spotting the sleeping Usoko in the library on the way out that night, the bloodlust filling her up, egging her on, returning in the dead of night, then attacking Usoko? No! I couldn't have, she blurted, tears dripping from her eyes. With barely a thought, Emiko snapped the relatively tough metal bonds around her wrists and wiped the tears from her eyes. "So you're finally awake, Majesty," called an unfamiliar voice outside the cell, its owner speaking in a southern accent. "That's good. We have some questions for you." Stepping in front of the cell door was a violet-haired cat girl, who Emiko would later learn was named Lydia Nakamoto, the vice commander of Gardna. Along with her was what appeared to be a bodyguard, a wereshark in full beast form, with her clawed arms crossed over her chest. "I have some as well," replied Emiko, attempting to affect a regal tone. "When my father hears what you've done to me, you will be most sorry." "He was the one who told us to throw you in there," stated Lydia coldly, her gaze stern. "Normally, you'd have been kept in an, albeit locked, waiting room. Are you aware of what you're here for? What it is you've done?" Emiko fidgeted. Truthfully, she didn't, though she had a good idea. She had some memories of claiming to be the local serial killer, though in truth there was only one kill to her name. A memory that made her want to puke every time she thought of it. She had thought to get help for what she was going through, worrying it was some sort of Oni puberty or something, but she'd been too scared to mention it to anyone, even her father. Of course, once she'd actually killed someone, she knew she could absolutely not tell anyone what had happened. "At least, that's what I can recall," said Emiko when she explained all of that to Lydia. "The Suzumiya girl, was that it?" "Yes, that was me. I cannot explain why, but it's as though something comes over me. Something terrible. I've tried so hard to keep it at bay. There have been many times I've nearly killed, but she's the only one I actually did." Lydia looked over her right shoulder to someone Emiko couldn't see. "Yes, that lines up with what we've uncovered," came their voice, a masculine voice, but young-sounding. Couldn't be much older than Emiko herself. "The other 3 victims' wounds do not match Ayame Hime's claws in either form. There's a separate killer." "Well, that's lovely," sighed Lydia, rolling her eyes. "But that begs the question, Majesty. Why did you admit to killings you didn't actually commit?" That Emiko actually had an answer for. "Considering the psychosis I was experiencing, I probably would have admitted to being the Zodiac killer if you'd asked," she retorted. "Look, Lydia's emergency phone started to ring then, cutting Emiko off as the cat girl went to take the call. Yes, Kobayashi? What's the situation? Her ears went from relaxed on either side to straight up in alarm. A banshee? You certain? That definitely complicates things. What? It took Takibana's sister? Oh, that's just great. I'll alert Nanami. She'll be over soon. Emiko's heart felt like it had stopped. Kuriko? Some damn spook had kidnapped little Kuro? Oh, no. No. Oh, hell no. There was no way she was gonna allow that. Ma'am, I couldn't help overhearing, said Emiko, keeping her currently wild and raging emotions at bay. Kuriko is, much like Usoko, a very good friend. I must help them, please. Yeah, no, stated Lydia flatly. Unless you've got some damn good reason to let you out of here and send you to the same person you tried to kill last night, you're staying right there. I have Amaso, admitted Emiko. Have since I was very young. My father can confirm. Look, I do not know why I did what I did, but right now I know you have no reason to trust me, but I must help Usoko. I must atone for the things I did. Please. Her eyes began filling with tears, something that surprised Lydia greatly. If Emiko was lying, she'd have to be a damn good actor. And while it wouldn't be a huge shock, no, Lydia could feel the genuineness coming from Emiko. This was real. Very well. Let me make one phone call. I must inform Nanami. The vampire who brought me in, I presume. All right. Emiko was not relishing the thought of meeting that girl again anytime soon. Her jaw still hurt from where the damn vamp had impaled her. As Lydia made her call, it gave Emiko a moment to consider what she'd say to Usoko. She needed to apologize, that was absolutely for sure. She knew she'd said and done terrible things to her. To Uso-chan, her best friend! As she was still lost in thought, excuse me, I'm so sorry. A small ape boy came in and poked her in the arm with a syringe, drawing some blood. Oh, sorry, Ayame Hime, he apologized with a deep bow before scrambling back. Lydia won't want this. Sorry. Wait, hold on, there's something else we have to tell you, cried Lydia into the receiver. You're going to be accompanied by... That girl is so impatient sometimes. All right, we're going to trust you just this once. But if you even think of betraying us, Nanami has orders to cut you down. Is that clear? Emiko-ame? Handing the Oni her glasses, Lydia paused to see how she would react. As crystal, ma'am, replied Emiko, having now activated her human illusion once more and giving a slight bow. All right. Aru, you have the blood? Good. Lydia held her gaze on Emiko, as if daring the Oni princess to make a move. We're gonna analyze your blood. See if there's any pathogens or anything that could have caused that. Given what you said, it seems likely, and such discovery would go a long way towards exonerating you. Now, go. This is your only chance. You will not get another. Not needing any more of an invitation, Emiko rushed past them, towards where her instincts said the nearest outside door was. Taking a half-second to turn invisible, she burst through the door, took flight, and headed straight for Usoko's building. Her mind was racing as she tried to think of something to say. Some sort of apology, or anything to say, but the words just wouldn't mesh. As she flew, no eyes down below could see her on that gray day. No living eyes, at least. One pair, clouded and silvery, watched her, though. Eyes set in slimy, cadaverous skin. It held held in a head held by the hands of its own decaying corpse. Watching her till she was out of sight, the rotting thing turned back into the shadows and vanished. Present day. The medical team at Gardner had seen and dealt with many different odd situations before, as would be expected from a facility in such a place. As such, there was not much they hadn't seen by this point. A Mothman with tendinitis? Yep. Nightcrawler with a broken ankle? Indeed. Jersey Devil with an eye infection? Well, not a fun experience, to be sure. This Tatsuya Takibana situation, however, had the top minds stumped. As far as we can tell, physically, she is dead, said Dr. Arnold Kuma, as an older fellow, a werebear with white hair, whose yokai crystal made him bear more than a passing resemblance to Albert Einstein. He had been employed with Gardner for nearly 60 years, and had never come across anything like this. Himself and his assistant, Dr. Freeman, were sitting in Dr. Kuma's office, explaining the findings of their research into Usoko's mother to the Pinkette. However, brain scans indicate that she is indeed still in there. Furthermore, comparing how she looks now to images taken by the coroner before the autopsy, she has healed completely, which, and as a scientist, I do not use this word lightly, should be impossible. We opted to perform a genetic sampling to see if perhaps she had some sort of mutation that could explain these factors. However, the results indicate her DNA to not be of any race on record. He took a moment to adjust some papers on his desk before handing a folder to Usoko. Ms. Takibana, with all this taken into account, we feel it safe to say that it would appear your mother is indeed an angel, as was suspected. Usoko simply sat there, taking in the information as it was being given. Being told such a thing was possible was one thing, but seeing evidence of it with her own two eyes was another. Usoko still hadn't mentioned to anyone the dream she'd had on the ride back from Kaiju Island, where she'd been tempted by Aramanes before being saved by the spirit of her mother. After all, even Usoko was having a hard time believing it. Now, though... Thank you, doctors, she said, getting up from her seat and bowing. I'm sure there isn't much you can really do at this point, but could you at least make sure she's comfortable? The elderly doctor nodded, glancing at his assistant. I believe we can arrange that. Ah, yes, Dr. Freeman. Could you give Ms. Takibana the pager? Freeman, who'd been stone-faced and silent the entire time, nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and began pawing through a nearby cabinet. Pager? Asked Usoko. What's that? Ah, a bit of tech from an earlier time. You're going to be on a trip far from here, yes? Beyond cell reception, I do believe. This pager will do you good there. It's a way to keep in contact, as it uses satellite communications rather than cell towers. If there's an emergency, it will go off and alert you to return post-haste. Finally, Dr. Freeman seemed to find the thing and handed it to Usoko, who gave it a cursory look. It was a hunk of black plastic, not much larger than a toy car, with a small backlit digital display and a few buttons along the bottom. It seemed absolutely archaic to the Pinkette, but regardless, she put it in her purse and thanked the men for their hard work before leaving the office, only to be met by her chaperone to New Atlantis, Elizabeth Kosaka. Finally finished, are we? She inquired, putting down the book she'd been reading while sat on a bench outside the room. Good. We're running late as it is. Come on. Elizabeth was no longer wearing prison orange. Instead, she was wearing one of Usoko's school uniforms, as there was not much else around in the Dampier's size, and the Pinkette had refused to use her clothes beam to make her a new outfit. Elizabeth could have simply donned the outfit she'd been wearing when she arrived, the one made of leather straps with little bits of material covering her private areas, and an oversized white cloak. But given they needed to look inconspicuous for the first leg of their trip, Elizabeth had begrudgingly gone along with it. Usoko herself was really not looking forward to leaving so soon. She'd only just gotten home a few days prior and was still very much recovering from the trip to Kaiju Island. She knew she hadn't had the worst of it. After all, she'd spoken briefly with both Nonami and her own grandmother about what had occurred after both Usoko and Emiko had left. But even still, her body was exhausted, and she just wanted a chance to relax. All of that, coupled with the fact that this murderous Dampier was the only one who knew about the mysterious sorceress that could teach Usoko the spell needed to revive her mother, and would therefore be accompanying her, left Usoko feeling more than a bit nettled. Yeah, whatever. Let me go grab my suitcase. She glanced down to where it had been, next to Elizabeth's right leg, only to be met with empty space. Hey! Where'd it go? About that, replied Elizabeth, in a rather bored tone. I believe one of Lydia's spawn ran off with it. The wheeled one. What? Blurted Usoko, fuming. Why didn't you stop her? Not my monkeys, not my circus, chided the Dampier sardonically, pushing back some brown hair that had fallen into her eyes. She hadn't had a chance to re-dye it, so she was still wearing her natural reddish-brown hair instead of the eye-searing shade of highlighter yellow she much preferred to keep it in. This, coupled with a pair of thick-rimmed glasses she was currently sporting, as well as in addition to the uniform, made Elizabeth look more like one of Usoko's classmates than anything else. Figures, grumbled Usoko as she dialed Lydia's number. Hey, Mrs. Nakamoto, I think Claire stole my suitcase. Can I get some help? As Lydia started apologizing on behalf of her younger daughter, Usoko's eyes spotted something. She thought she'd spotted a very familiar-looking green tail peeking out from behind a corner. So maybe she hadn't gotten too far. Good. Hold on, whispered Usoko, setting the phone down and slowly tiptoeing towards the waggling green tail. At last, when there could be no chance of escape, she clasped it in both hands with a victorious shout. Ha-ha! Gotcha, Claire! Now give me back my suitcase! There was the distinctive sound of a cat screech, as Usoko realized the tail she was gripping was lime, actually, and not light green, and a bit longer than she expected, come to think. Uh-oh. Usoko! Hissed Cecily, her face contorted into a cat-like scowl, her claws dangerously close to Usoko's own face, before she realized what was happening. Why did you grab my tail? Releasing Cecily's tail, Usoko took 2 big steps back and began bowing deeply and profusely. I am so sorry, she apologized emphatically. Claire stole my suitcase, and I saw your tail and thought it was hers, and sorry. Cecily took a moment to straighten out the fur on her tail, licking her hand and rubbing it like an actual cat, before carefully wrapping it around her waist like a belt. Usoko, you shouldn't go grabbing tails, she said, now a bit calmer, but still spooked. Especially if it's a little one. They tend to claw stuff up. Especially people who grab them. Now, if you're looking for Claire, I think I saw her with Carrie, heading towards the roof a couple minutes ago. Had a big box with him, too. Thanks, Miss Nakamoto. shouted Usako, grabbing her phone and rushing towards the roof access while explaining the situation to Lydia. That had certainly gotten a chuckle out of the violet-haired cat girl anyway, though she was still incredibly embarrassed about what her children had done. Once she arrived at the rooftop, Usako immediately began scanning the area for any sign of those obnoxious kittens. There was every possibility they had simply gone down another service stairway. The roof of Ayanami Industries had several access points, as well as a helipad. But this area was still damaged from the fire a few months prior, and thus limited where the kittens could have safely gone. Safely, of course, being the key word, as Usako knew these girls were capable of some pretty impressive feats of either daring or stupidity, depending on how you looked at it. And with her stuff, too, no less. Great. Hey, Claire, Carrie, it's Usako, she called out, cupping her hands over her mouth. Look, I'm not in the mood to play. I'm gonna miss my flight if I don't leave soon. I could really use that suitcase back, okay? The sounds of muffled, childish giggling could be heard from somewhere nearby. Usako recognized it as the kittens immediately and took a step towards the source. When she did so, the giggles immediately ceased as the girls realized they'd been made. No! Giggled Carrie. Claire found it fair and square. Come on, give it back, moaned Usako, before an idea formed in her head. She could sense Lydia's life energy getting closer. It had been a neat trick her grandmother had taught her these last couple days. Now if she could time it right... Don't make me count 3, or I'll use my magic to summon your mama, and she'll be super mad. You can't do that, teased Claire from the same alcove as her sister. Right? Carrie just shrugged. 1, started Usako in her best impression of her mom, timing it with Lydia starting up the second-to-last flight of stairs. 2. Lydia was close now, but stumbled halfway up the last flight. 2.5. If I say 3... Usako let the implied threat hang for a brief moment. Just as the word 3 issued from her lips, the kitten's mother burst through the door, a most cross expression on her face. Clarissa and Carissa Nekomoto! She yowled in both in frustration and embarrassment for what her children had done. Give Miss Takabana her suitcase back right now, or so help me, you'll be grounded for a year. Panicking, the kittens scrambled out of their hidey hole, Carrie dragging the heavy suitcase as best she could towards Usako. Sorry, Takibana-sama. They both apologized in unison, bowing cutely. It's okay, girls, sighed Usako in relief, turning to Lydia. Hey, you feeling all right, ma'am? Usako had noticed that Lydia was flushed in the face and sweating profusely. And while normally she'd chalk it up to the cat girl having run up several flights of stairs, Usako knew Lydia better than that. Lydia had the body of a professional athlete. If some stairs were giving her trouble, something was wrong. Yes, I'm just... stammered Lydia, trying her best to collect herself, cupping her hands next to Usako's ear and whispering, I'm just... I'm starting to go into heat. I won't be around God enough for a couple weeks, actually. Please don't ask me about it. Oh, yeah, that's okay, replied Usako, blushing. She wasn't 100% sure she knew what Lydia was talking about, but she had a good idea what was meant by it. Grabbing her suitcase, she gave each of the kittens a hug in turn to let them know she had no hard feelings, before making her way back towards Elizabeth, where the two would then begin their brief trip to the Kongu airport. They would be flying to Bermuda, with a brief 2-night stop in LA to change flights. From there, They would fly out of LAX to LaGuardia in New York, then finally to the island of Bermuda. Once there, they would board a submarine which would take them to New Atlantis, deep in the heart of the Bermuda Triangle. As they boarded their first flight, a girl with black, braided hair, thick glasses, and wearing an unfamiliar school uniform came running towards the gate, dragging a trunk behind her. Sorry, she cried to the stewardess who helped her load the cumbersome thing on board. I overslept and barely made it here in time. I'm so sorry. Strange, thought Usoko. Something about her seemed oddly familiar. And that trunk, it looked a lot like one her mother used to own. Finally, they were able to get the incredibly flustered girl's luggage stowed away, and she went to her seat. As she passed by Usoko, the Pinkett could swear she'd seen her someplace before. And her voice, too, seemed just a bit familiar. And as soon as it arrived, the familiarity faded. Must be someone from school, she thought with a shrug, fastening her seatbelt. The trip to LA, even if only for a day or two, really excited Usoko. Finally, a chance to go home, see some of her old haunts again. Speaking of haunts, maybe she'd get to do a little ghost hunting at Griffith Park, now that she knew spirits were real. Speaking of spirits, they also needed to rendezvous with Sarah and get her the plane tickets she needed to get back to Japan. Due to Sarah's unique nature, she couldn't just walk into an airport and haunt a plane bound for Japan. She needed to have a ticket in order to be allowed into the airport at all, even if she didn't actually have to use it. Usoko hoped that if this sorceress could teach her the spell to wake her mom up, maybe she'd have something to help Sarah, too. Ever flown before? Asked Usoko of Elizabeth, if only because she needed someone to talk to. Many times, yes, replied the Dhampir, adding with a whisper, I was actually there when the Wright brothers first got off the ground, back in 1903. No way, exclaimed Usoko quietly. Exactly, no way. I wasn't even born yet, kid, she snickered. I was actually born in 1951, if you must know, in a small town in Oregon. It has since burned to the ground. Oh, replied Usoko, then turning her attention to the book she'd brought with. Clearly, Elizabeth wasn't much for conversation. Minami? Here. Sonoda? Here. Takibana? Classes had finally started back up again at Tsukiyomi Academy, much to just about everyone's relief. There was only so long anyone can stay cooped up with little to do, let alone a whole school's worth of teenage girls. In Class 2B, Satori Kurimura had just finished taking attendance and noticed that Usoko was conspicuously absent. Takibana? Usoko Takibana? Oh, where is that girl? Emiko raised her hand. Ma'am, Usoko told me to inform you that there has been a family emergency with a relative of hers back in America, and she may be gone for some time. She has, of course, informed the dean as such. Apologies. Oh, that's all well and good then, sighed the teacher. Do extend my condolences, would you? After that brief exchange, classes passed like a breeze, and Emiko was glad when when the bell finally rang to dismiss them for lunch. On her way out the door, though, a couple of her less than savory classmates stopped her. Hey, class rep, said Kanata Ishimura, leaning against the door frame, intentionally sticking out her leg to block Emiko's exit. Is it true that you and that weirdo Takibana are, dating or something? Come on, it's all over campus. Emiko couldn't help but feel her blood start to boil at that. Ishimura always knew just how to get under anyone's skin. It seemed to be her special talent. Indeed, responded Emiko brightly, before her tone drastically darkened. And I needn't remind you that just as it's always been. You mess with Usoko, you mess with me. Yeah, I know, replied Kanata smugly. Just never pegged you as a lesbo, Ayame. What do you see in her, anyway? Emiko's fist clenched as she restrained the urge to throw this impish human into a wall. I see an amazing girl, the woman I love, and my best friend. Emiko then effortlessly picked the stubborn girl up under the arms and carefully set her aside before walking off towards the cafeteria, leaving her and her two cohorts shocked. They knew Emmy was a bit strong, but not that strong. If only they knew, laughed Emiko to herself. In the cafeteria, she could feel eyes on her. She was used to it. Her height and hair color did make her stand out, after all. Today, though, it felt very different. It did indeed seem that word of her and Usoko's relationship had spread, and everyone was giving her the side eye as she got her food. Taking her seat in her usual spot, it didn't take long for a group of upperclassmen to make their way over. Hey, Ame. Sup? Asked the 4A class rep, Amanda Jenkins. She was a recent transfer from America, and while popular with her own classmates, a lot of the teachers and staff disliked her disrespectful attitude towards them. Is there a problem? Asked Emiko, attempting to keep her cool. God, how she hated Amanda. Her voice was like fingernails on a chalkboard. Yeah, you might say that, she sneered, reaching for Emmy's meal. See, word around school is you're some kind of In a flash, Emiko grabbed her by the wrist and squeezed quite firmly, pulling the upperclassman in close. Choose your next words very carefully, whispered Emiko harshly, or you won't like what comes next. To emphasize this, she added just a bit more pressure, enough to make Amanda's wrist audibly pop. You bitch! She snapped in English before taking a calming breath and switching back to Japanese. Sorry, I meant to say I hear you're dating another girl. Don't you think that's kind of weird? Who I choose to date is none of your concern, senpai, replied Emiko, allowing every ounce of disdain she felt towards this girl seep into that last word. And if you're smart, you'll keep your silly little questions to yourself, girl. Everything that happened next happened in the space of an instant. Amanda spit into Emiko's food. Emmy's grip on the girl's wrist tightened to the breaking point as she then flung the girl over her shoulder and into a fortunately empty table. Her two cronies, thinking they had a numbers advantage, decided to try and take Emiko on, only to be knocked down to the floor with two brief throat chops. Let me make something absolutely clear, she announced to all so all could hear. Who I choose to date is my own business. If you don't like it, that is your problem, and I don't care. If you choose to make it mine, however, you will end up on the floor as well. Any questions? No? I thought not. Damn, that felt good. Meanwhile, in the middle school portion of Tsukuyomi Academy, Class 2F. Ibuki? Here. Akagi? Here. Katsuragi? Present. Takibana? Kuroko Takibana? Odd, that girl's never skipped class. Let's see. Yeah, well, this part can be done. Nonami hated riding in the carriage. She and Francine, formerly Farah, her sister, had traveled together to visit their old family home, Castle Orlok. It had been decades since Nonami had been home. For Farah, it had been well over a century, and she hadn't exactly left on amicable terms. Given both the location and the terrain leading to it, the only expedient way to reach the castle was by horse-drawn carriage, something Nonami absolutely despised, as it gave her the worst case of motion sickness. Francine, for her part, was using a weak soothing spell on her younger sister to try and calm her tumultuous tummy, but it ultimately did very little. "Driver, how close are we now?" asked Nonami, figuring they had to be nearly there by this point. Without thinking about it, she started scratching at her neck again. Though all but healed now, the scar from where she'd been briefly decapitated on Kaiju Island was still a fair bit visible, and it was bugging her. It had a tendency to itch as her skin healed itself, as it did now. And no matter what chokers, scarves, turtlenecks, or what have you that Nonami tried, nothing seemed to soothe the itch. "Ah, not much further, my lady," he replied. "Perhaps 10 minutes at most. The parapets are in view now if you wish to see." Figuring she could use a change in scenery, Nonami slid down the carriage's window shade and stuck her head out, not being able to suppress a smile. The tallest of the towers were indeed now in view. Cresting just over the hill they were now climbing, as they made it up higher and higher, soon more and more of the castle came into view, until eventually the drawbridge appeared. "Home," sighed Nonami wistfully. "I never expected to see it again," whispered Francine as emotions ran through her. Do you think they still remember me?" "Oh, wait, no. Do they still remember me, you think?" "The maids?" asked Nonami. "Some may. Bethany still works for us. She's our head maid now, actually. And grandfather's girls as well." "Do you two mind? I'm trying to read here. Take it in the other room." I love my cats. Sorry, I'm so sorry. "And grandfather's girls as well. They still take care of him. Most of the rest who were there when it happened have either moved on or otherwise found alternative employment." "Yes, Bethany," mumbled Francine. I would like very much to apologize for everything I did. Specifically to her. It's weighed on me for quite a while now." "I am sure she'll give you the chance," Nonami smiled, casting her gaze to the horizon. The sun was just starting to set now, and by the time the carriage stopped just across the wooden bridge, it had receded enough that Nonami could change to her true form. Coming out of the gates were 3 familiar faces, one of which was practically rushing towards them, though trying his best not to look as though he were. "Mother, it's so good to see you again!" he exclaimed, hugging Nonami. Maria. "Have you been well? I cannot wait to hear all about everything that has happened while you've been in Japan." Returning his hug, Maria could not help the small tears flecking her eyes. Though around the time of his conception, Maria was less than enthused about having children. Seeing her boy all grown up like this certainly made her feel something akin to pride. "I am quite glad to see you as well, Claude," smiled Maria, her red eyes glinting. "And there's someone else I'd like you to meet." Claude's stance shifted reflexively, ever so slightly, becoming a bit defensive. "Yes, I'd heard you were bringing her as well," he said, a chill running through his tone. "I cannot say I'm thrilled, Mother, but I trust your judgment on this matter, as does great-grandfather." Just then, a woman with long silver hair, flowing like silk down her back, approached Maria and Claude, bowing to Maria. It actually took Maria a second to recognize Bethany Marks, as the head maid had seemingly taken on a new personality in the time since Maria had last seen her. Before, she'd been a timid woman, a result of her encounter with Farah centuries ago. Now there was a stone-like sternness in those crimson eyes, a determination the likes of which Maria had never seen on those otherwise soft features. "Greetings, my queen," she said, taking Maria's travel bag. "I hope your trip was satisfactory. You will be pleased to know that your chamber has been prepared ahead of your arrival, as it has been for your guest as well." Her gaze lingered on Francine for an uncomfortably long time before Francine stepped forward. At first, Maria expected a confrontation, but what happened instead was just as shocking to both her and Bethany. Francine, as best she could in her advanced age, went down to her knees, clasping Bethany's free hand with both of hers, and matched her gaze. "Bethany, for what I did to you, to the others, words cannot begin to express how apologetic I am. I cannot expect forgiveness, nor do I. I am sorry, though, for everything." She produced a crystal rod from her purse and waved it in front of Bethany's chest. It was clear that whatever Francine had done had drained much of her energy as she sagged to the ground like a deflating balloon, being caught by both Maria and Claude. "That should have removed the scar. I... Consciousness fled from her as the toll to her healing spell took on her came into effect. A silence hung over them for a moment. No one had exactly expected that, of all things. Maria had known her sister was going to apologize, of course, but didn't have any inclination she'd go this far. Bethany seemed to be the most shocked out of all of them, seeming to be on the verge of tears. Taking the initiative, and without hesitation, Claude carefully picked his aunt up and began carrying her into the castle. Everyone but Bethany followed suit, as the maid was still processing what had just happened. She had to know for sure. When Francine had placed her crystal rod against her chest, Bethany had felt an odd tingling. Upon opening her blouse and looking down, she was speechless. The scarred F that Francine, then Farah, had carved into her skin was indeed gone. Not even a trace remained. Inside the castle, a beeline was made to the room that had been prepared for Francine. Her old bedroom, kept just the way it had for centuries, had been freshly dusted, cleaned of any lingering cobwebs, and all the bedclothes and linens had been thoroughly washed. Gently laying her down, Claude placed a hand against her forehead to check for a fever. As both a vampire and dweller, she may be unable to get sick, but a fever could still be indicative of an internal problem. Fortunately, her temperature felt normal to him. "Still, she will probably be fine, I believe," announced Claude. "Mother, did she give you any indication this could happen? Do you know if she'll be all right?" "She did tell me she had hoped to make amends with Bethany," answered Maria. "I had no indication she had planned to go this far, however. Her current condition is likely a result of her waning magical energies. Oh God, I'm sorry. She was quite weak after aiding me in my rescue as well, back on the island." Maria turned to look at her sister's advancedly aged face and sighed. "I think after some rest and a good meal, she'll be fine." "Ah, wonderful," came another aged voice, this one masculine and full of energy despite that. In the doorway of the room was a man with a distinguished look about him, an older gentleman around 5'10", with an impish grin that narrowed his twinkling eyes when he smiled. His hair had long ago turned gray, which he wore in a tasteful comb over. His cheeks had a constant tint of rosiness to them, and he wore a pair of reading glasses which were perched on the end of his wide nose. His name was Murnau von Orlock, Maria and Francine's grandfather. At his side was one of his closest attendants, who helped him with certain tasks he couldn't quite do anymore. Murnau was something of a handyman, always had been, but in his old age he had trouble doing things around the castle he had once done with ease. That rarely stopped him, though, and oftentimes he could be found hammering away at a loose board to try and reset it, or fixing a piece of furniture by carving an entirely new piece in his private workshop. His attendants, bless them, would have to constantly remind him that they'd have people to do that, and he doesn't need to trouble himself, to which he would often reply, "But it needs doing now." "Oh, grandfather," smiled Maria, rushing to hug him as though she were a kid again. "It's been much too long. I'm sorry I haven't been home sooner." "Hey there, little Podna," he smiled, returning his granddaughter's hug. "Is it my imagination, or are you still growing? I could swear you're still growing." "I do not believe so," sighed Maria, "but it has been some time since we've last seen each other, so it's possible." Murnau nodded, glancing over Maria's shoulder at the occupied bed behind her. "Is that Farah?" he asked, answered by Maria's nod. "Though she goes by Francine now. She is unconscious at the moment, and we do not know when she'll awaken." "If she'll awaken," added Maria mentally, crossing her fingers that such a fate would be avoided. "Well, for now, let us celebrate your return, my granddaughter. Then, once Francine, you said? Once Francine is awake again, we can have another celebration." "Why do I feel like that's just an excuse for you to break out the brandy?" grinned Maria. "Who, me?" laughed Murnau heartily in reply. "Never." Alright, that's where we're going to end part 1. I just want to say real quick, Murnau is 100% based on my late grandfather, in terms of both appearance and personality. And that whole handyman thing, that comes straight from Papo. Rest his soul. Anyway, I want to thank you for listening, sticking around. I'm going to try to do these, I'd like to do weekly, but you know how that goes around here. So, if not weekly, perhaps bi-weekly. But, yeah, book 4 has begun, and I hope you will enjoy. I will warn you, book 4, probably the darkest so far. And that's saying something considering some of the shit in book 3. But, until next time, I hope you enjoyed. Take care, have a good day, or night, or whatever it is. I hope you do good, hope you have a good one. And take care. Bye, Anara!